Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Keep It Wausome podcast, the podcast that brings you the most interesting, fascinating, and quirky people of Central Wisconsin and beyond. And today we're actually going beyond. I am speaking with a reporter from California who wrote a piece for City Pages about kind of following one of the Afghan ladies' trips from Kabul to Afghanistan. Before we get into that, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, and then I will bring Sharon in. Big shout out to Ghani's Ale House and Eatery. You know, you guys love their beer selection and the food's even better. So make sure to go check them out, Ghani's Ale House and Eatery. And we're brought to you by Campbell Haynes Menswear. Guys, up your style game today. I'm wearing one of their shirts right now. I actually remember to put it on today. So big shout out to Campbell Haynes Menswear. Check them out today. And last but not least, we are brought to you by Verve Salon. You know, Verve specializes in being all-inclusive, no matter what your hair type, skin type, they got you covered. They know how to treat all of you, whatever you bring to the table, they got you. So Verve Salon. And so today I'm brought to you by, or rather I'm bringing to you, Sharon, I always forget to ask pronunciations. Is it Sobotta? Sobotta?
Sobotta, you got it.
Where does the emphasis lie?
You know, it sounds like it should be S-A, right? Sobotta.
Sobotta, okay.
Polish name.
Oh, it is, yeah.
I think, right?
Oh, totally Polish, yeah.
That's so.
Kowalski's about as Polish as they get. Well, so what's really cool, Sharon, is you wrote this story about this woman who also happens to be an NPR reporter and producer. And you kind of highlight her journey from Kabul to Fort McCoy. And the reason the story resonated with me is because Wausau, you know, it was first announced that Wausau was going to receive some Ethiopian refugees. We didn't know how many at first. They just kind of left that vague. And then when they announced that there'd be like 10 coming first and then 75 later, so about, or so, you know, that's kind of a ballpark, I understand. It was also brought up that we'd be getting some Afghan refugees, and I don't know how many we're going to be getting. I got the impression it wasn't a lot of them, but it could be. I believe there's maybe 3,100 refugees there. Is that right?
It sounds like, I mean, they have so I've seen reports that say 13,000 are currently living in Fort McCoy, and my interviewee felt like there was as many as 20,000. So
oh wow,
let's say there's many that are
so
going
quite
to
a few. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if you could start off, Sharon, maybe you could tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then I'd be really curious as to how that story came about, how you got connected with Khwaga. Am I pronouncing that right?
Khwaga, yeah.
Khwaga.
Sorry, I apologize. Let me do that again. Her name is Khwaga Ghani.
Khwaga Ghani. Yeah, Khwaga Ghani. So, yeah, tell me how you connected with her and how you got the story.
Sure. So I, like many writers, have a couple of jobs. I work at a college. I'm the director of a Center for Women and Gender Equity. That's my day job. And then I also report for Pacifica KPFA. It's a radio station out here based in Berkeley. And I also write. I am working on some book projects and screenplays and lots of articles. I write for a couple of local publications. But one of the things I've been thinking about is my writing always has a social justice focus. That's always been my passion. So I might look at anything from mass incarceration to kind of the aftermath of what happened in Minnesota, Wisconsin after George Floyd's death and subsequent cases, right? And then I've always been interested in kind of connecting people from various backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds to each other through stories. And so I had, at the college where I work, one of the students that I support is from Afghanistan, or her roots are there. And interestingly, it was a Saturday morning. I was talking to my family who's in Wisconsin, where a piece of my heart is. And she was saying, are you going to talk to anybody at Fort McCoy? And I said, I really want to, but I don't know anybody there. And then I just touched base with my own Afghan student who's here. And she said, sure, I'll get you my cousin. She's in a different time zone though. And then it just purely worked out coincidentally that she happened to be at Fort McCoy. So that's how I got the story. And then
so this was the cousin of your student?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then I felt like I'm making this story that has this Wisconsin connection relevant and accessible to people across California. I felt like it would be a loss not to find an audience in Wisconsin, so that people in the neighborhood or the communities that are receiving people like Khwaga could learn about the story. So that's how I decided to pitch to City Pages.
And when you reached out, did you know that Wausau specifically was getting Afghan refugees, or was it kind of a guess like, well, I know they're going in Wisconsin, so maybe it's there?
No, you know what?
Mhm.
I didn't actually even have that insight. I was just looking for like, who has the City Pages? I knew this was a piece that I didn't want to be buried on like page 15 of the
Yeah.
Star Tribune in Minneapolis, or like or the Eau Claire Tribune, La Crosse Tribune, you name the newspaper, right? I was hoping
Yeah.
specifically for it to be City Pages. So I started to look at proximity, and I thought, well, Wausau is an interesting community. I'm familiar with the Stevens Point area and have made my way over to Wausau a few times. And then I found you all. And it turns out to be serendipitous that there's actually plans to settle a number of them in your community.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly. Because I had been like keeping that on my radar. I've obviously wrote some short stuff about when it was announced and that, but I was keeping my eyes on it because I knew some of the folks who were going to be working on the resettlement, and it actually worked out perfectly that Thursday night they were having the New Beginnings organization, which is helping kind of coordinate some of the resettlement here in partnership with the ECDC, the Ethiopian Community Development Council. Get that right? Usually got to look that up. So good, I remembered.
You got it.
I got it. Yep. So they held a webinar kind of explaining. I'm like, well, that makes my job easy. I can just watch the webinar and get most of my questions answered, and maybe reach out to a few folks afterwards with anything additional. But yeah, so I had this on my radar, had some idea. I had heard about some stuff that was going to be happening. This was, and I learned all this before the Afghan part of it, but I knew like there was some people organizing like kind of a dinner with Ethiopian food to kind of get people used to, hey, this is what their food is like, and kind of like just raise awareness and get people interested. And so yeah, it was great. When I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's actually really perfect. And I was a little leery of working with new freelancers because I found I've had some people, I've had people that said, oh, I'll write for free, and then I give them an assignment and I never hear from them again.
Oh yeah. No,
I didn't think that was going to be you, but there's always that little part in the back of my mind. So I did have a backup plan in case for that week, in case the story didn't come through. But nope, you came through, and it's quite the piece. So
yeah, you can't not come through. There's plenty of us that are trying to make it as a writer, and like I was just so committed to getting this piece out. So I felt really happy that you trusted me to take on this assignment. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it turned out really well. I was really interested in the piece. I thought it was great for people to see like what things are like in Afghanistan right now, and then what it's like for those people coming here, what the process is like. I heard something similar. I did a story back, was I at City Pages or was I back at the Stevens Point Journal? So I did like 5 years at the Stevens Point Journal. So I know Stevens Point very well too. It sounds like you got some family there.
I do. My sister and my nieces are there.
And did you grow up there, or did you grow up somewhere else?
No, I grew up in a tiny town called Whitehall. I don't know. It's like 2 hours away from.
I think I've heard of that. Which direction is it?
Okay, I'm terrible with directions. It's like 45 minutes. It would take you 45 minutes to go to Eau Claire from Whitehall and 45 minutes to go to La Crosse. I can't say it's exactly, but it's kind of in that general region.
That's kind of on the western side of the state.
Yes.
Okay.
I can tell you that much.
Well, yeah, so tangents aside, yeah, so I did this story about Islamic refugees back in, I think I was at the Journal yet. Maybe it was early City Pages days, but anyway, and I was very surprised to learn about just the sheer amount of vetting that refugees go through. And that was far enough back where people, still had, you don't really hear a lot about terrorism now, strangely enough, but back then, like, there was still a lot of a lot of fears about terrorism. And the point that someone made is like, well, if someone was going to go that route to get into the US, they'd be more likely to do it on a student visa, because the vetting is a lot less than it is to the refugee program. And that was something that that Miss Martinez, drawing a blank on her first name, she's one of the people who's one of the officials who's involved with, was actually the one who suggested Wausau as a resettlement zone.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think
she explained that there was like 9 different agencies that do the vetting.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things that makes me really interested in covering stories related to the Muslim American population, or the people who are Muslims who are living here and beyond. Islamophobia, I think, is still pretty vast in our society. And I think when we think about terrorists right now, like the most common terrorist in this day and age is a white male over, I forget the exact age range, but I think kind of the stigma or the narrative that gets attached to this particular group of people can be dangerous as well. And that's why I think it's important, like the more that we can humanize people just by virtue of sharing their stories, I think the better it is.
Right. Yeah. And what kind of audience did you have for the story in California? So do you have it published in California as well, in a different form maybe?
So I anchor the news on Sundays. I solo anchor on the 3rd and the 5th Sunday. Any months that have 5 months, I do those, and then I co-anchor on Saturdays. So I did a long form radio piece. So that means it's reaching our population, the population in San Francisco, Berkeley. We also go out to Santa Cruz. They've added on Monterey and Fresno. So we're reaching a big area of California. One thing that I found when I first came to California, now I've been here half of my life, 2 decades, was that when I got here, people were like, oh, have you ever crossed paths? I bet you've never crossed paths with a person of color before, have you? And I'm like, oh, no, yes, I have. I went to St. Cloud State. We had the highest international student population of anywhere. And my particular group of friends was from all over the world. So there's sort of this assumption about that area, and some of my listeners would be the people who might have those assumptions.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if you've encountered, and then I've also encountered, and I always fought against that narrative really hard. And then I went back to Wisconsin the last 2 summers, and I was like, oh, wait, it felt like there's a little bit of a shift, or we were, there's a little tension in the state, I felt like. So
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Wausau in particular was part of the, is it 3rd or 7th? Anyway, we were, Wausau was part of what was once the whitest congressional district in the entire country. And then that changed with the Hmong migrations starting in the 1970s, late 1970s, going into the 80s. And so this is what I grew up, when I grew up, the Hmong immigration was like in full force. And yeah, a lot of people didn't react very well to that. And it's kind of funny because now today, like I think everyone kind of gets along. I don't think there's a lot of racial tension. There's probably still some. I mean, that's kind of stuff is, I don't know, hard to get rid of 100%, but I don't think there's any more than any other place in the country necessarily. And so it's interesting now because now it's like, oh, we have another immigration wave, and there are some voices. They're pretty minor compared to what we heard during the Hmong immigration era. They're pretty minor, but they are out there saying, oh, immigration, they're going to take services and this and that. It's like, well, we've been through this before and it was fine. And frankly, the numbers were a lot higher than they are now. So I think it'll be just fine.
Yeah, and the thing is, I've been really impressed with like the Wausau Stevens Point area in terms of the amount of really progressive voices that are there. I mean, this is tangential a little bit, actually pretty tangential, but yet, remotely related. Like I was in that area for 4th of July weekend, and I went with my sister to this concert called Gangsta Grass, and I sat down and interviewed these guys. Did you happen to go, by the way?
No, I'm familiar with them though.
Yeah, and I
little
was
bit,
like,
yeah.
Stevens Point, Wisconsin has this America's Got Talent group that were brilliant in their approach and like really bringing
Mhm.
different people together on stage and having like a broader conversation. So the fact that I'm seeing like that you could hear this band even in a town like that, that's pretty awesome, I think, and it's a sign.
Mhm.
It seems like a positive sign of progress.
I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I think even I don't think it's just progressives too. I mean, I think conservatives have changed. I just don't think there's a lot of that, despite despite what I think a lot of people think. I don't think there's a lot of that intolerance on the right around here either. There's definitely some. I mean, there's definitely those people who are just kind of out in la la land on for both political parties, really. I mean, but then I think most people in general are just pretty accepting of people who are homosexual or people of different races. I mean, that's my perspective. Maybe some people
Yeah.
disagree with that, but from what I see, being a journalist, I tend to talk to people in all political parties, and I don't see a lot of that stuff where I would have seen that growing up. In fact, I was helping. This was probably well, no, it was probably longer, probably about 10 years ago. I was helping a coworker move, and her neighbor said something about her Hmong neighbors, and I remember it kind of shocked me because, and I always had this sort of this feeling when saying the word Hmong that I was saying something wrong, and I couldn't figure out why that was. And that
Hmm.
was because in the 80s, when I was growing up, people said the word Hmong with just dripping venom.
Mm.
And it was that lady saying the word Hmong that way. She's an elderly lady,
Yeah.
probably gone now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Saying it that way, reminded me, it's like, oh yeah, that's why, because that's how people used to say it. They made it almost like a bad word. And interesting, I've come to learn recently, I've been saying it wrong. It's actually supposed to be pronounced more like Mong, like Mong.
Mom.
I
Okay.
don't know, I can't
The
quite get it
longer.
right.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
But oops, did you get muted or did I?
I don't know. Can you not hear me?
Oh, there you are. It's just my mic. Keep
Okay.
speaking. There we are.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I think
Mhm.
that's an important point that you're emphasizing that people of any particular, regardless where they fall on the political belief spectrum, there could be narrow-mindedness at any place. And I think you alluded to that in your recent article where you were kind of challenging cancel culture.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well, it's particularly challenging New York Times, but cancel culture is part of it, I think.
right. I mean, that was my like buy-in because
It,
I'm
it
fine.
was a little tongue in cheek and a little not.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting. And I mean, it reminds me of this conversation where we can't make it, no place is just one particular thing. People and places are multidimensional. And so I try to inspire listeners if I'm on the radio or readers to look at things in more of like a both and perspective. Because I think if we're in an either or place and we want to like shutting down a dialogue, I don't think it's going to get us anywhere. So I'm actually really glad that you even helped me reframe, right now as we're talking about progressives versus conservatives or whatnot. I think it's more about, open-mindedness, being willing to talk.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's stuff like that is really interesting too. Around here 10 years ago, stuff like gay marriage was still like a really hot button issue. And it seemed like most people seem to be on the against side around here. And this is an interesting insight into how social things change and how they do, because they never seem to change in the moment of conflict. They always kind of change after the fact, and then it's really swift, because like the national discourse around gay marriage just flipped like that from I mean, it was a long time, and then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, suddenly the national sentiment changed. And
Yeah.
we see that with other things too. And I think that's a really interesting point. So I think if you're advocating for a position, it's really easy to get caught up in the day to day, but progress doesn't really work like that. It tends to kind of come when you least expect it, and seemingly when the least effort is being put forward.
Yeah, for sure. And if we can we bring it back a little, kind of talk a little bit about Khwaga again.
Let's do it. Yeah, we should bring it back.
So, I mean, the thing about that piece that's connected to this larger conversation, and I mean, you were talking about like gay marriage and the way that's been covered in the media. And I think if we think about the narratives that we hear about people who happen to follow the Muslim faith or identify with that, there's just so often the narrative is attached to that T word that you mentioned earlier. And so people have their own kind of narrow views, and it's something like 75% of the country hasn't actually had a chance to have coffee or have a meal with a person who happens to be Muslim if they're of a different background. And so part of what I wanted to do, or what I want to do and aim to do as a journalist, as a writer, as a person, is just to help people get beyond those narrow views. Like sometimes I'll find people who are like, oh, well, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about the hijab. And the students that I'm working with are saying, well, but can we move past that though? Whether or not we choose to wear a hijab, like that's not really an issue, but like that's like the most surface level, and that's the most comfortable thing that sometimes for people to talk about, which is an interesting thing. And it's just something that people don't necessarily have familiarity with. The other thing that I did bring up in this piece was like the ways in which some people would say Muslim women have been used as a trope when there's a military intervention or something to that effect that's going to take place. So one of my interviewees was mentioning like, you know, at the same time as we were waging a war in Afghanistan to free women, or that was one of the things that was being used, there were some really incongruent policies happening here in the United States that were harming, or some might argue, might have limited women's rights here. And so kind of just being able to look at the nuances and saying, oh yeah, there's some oppressive issues happening over here, and there's also some happening over here, rather than otherizing, I think, kind of finding that common ground.
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your impressions of her, you know, what impressions did you take away of her? Because there was some really interesting stuff. I particularly pulled out the quote where she, well, I didn't pull it out as in a pull quote, but it stuck with me, like when she was talking about some of the promises that the Taliban making, and it sounds like she kind of just laughed and you said that, and said she laughed because I'm like, the fact that she could, like, because I was just thinking like, man, I'd be terrified of that stuff, right? Like she sounded like she was really fearful for her life, and you know, for her to be able to sort of like in reflection kind of laugh about almost not even having a sense of humor necessarily, but that could be her reaction. I thought, well, this is a pretty tough person. Like she's not afraid of much.
Yeah, no, Khwaga is super cool, and she's like full of personality, and she is funny. You know, I wish that if you could hear the tone, like when she was saying, I had to choose between Texas and Wisconsin, and she was like, Wisconsin, please. You know, she heard all of the different things about Texas, and she just didn't imagine. She imagined that as a place that would be much more Islamophobic, and she's imagining many things based on narratives she's seen in the news. So she had that kind of, she's very strong, right? And that came through all the way in her story. And I think even if you read her voice on the page, I will share the podcast with you in case, or like where you could hear the interview with you, if people wanted to hear her actual.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to attach it at the end here for people to listen to. We won't have any video, but if you want to listen to the whole interview, I believe you were okay with us doing that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
so
for sure.
We'll download the audio and attach that to the end here.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then I was just going to say the other thing that I thought was so intriguing. I don't want to cut you off, but is it okay if I do?
Go ahead.
So I decided to kind of start the piece with coffee, because that's her family ritual. And like, that's, if you think about like, who doesn't love to start their day with coffee or tea? It's one of my favorite things. It's a universal activity, right? And so, you know, in the morning they'd have their coffee, and then she'd go off and do her story. And she went wherever the story was, and she was covering some war crimes related to the Taliban. I don't know what it looked like to do that, but it certainly had some danger involved. And her mom would be so happy when she got home at the end of the night.
Right.
So just like coffee in the beginning and the end of the night were like the thing that kept her going, and like, and the family held on to hope in between. And then, you know, ironically, she has to go without coffee for,
Right.
for 10 plus days. And then it ends up to be like the small things, like, you know, she was thinking there was a bread shortage in
Right.
Wisconsin because she couldn't have any bread to go with her coffee. And by the way, you people probably don't know, but it sounds like you have a connection with a baker who might be able to do something about that.
We are trying to work that out. I actually got an email from Fort McCoy saying that my request would be sent to the appropriate person, and I was reminded that they do in fact have food, which is not what I didn't say they didn't have food. I just said it sounded like they want bread and don't have it. So we were trying to get some bread to people, and I was just asking about I just wanted to like double check to make sure there weren't any restrictions on food, or if there was a certain way you had to handle that or something. And but yeah,
That's so
we
funny.
us and
They're
Boyd,
definitely fed.
yeah, me and Boyd, I'm gonna help fund the materials, and makes probably the best bread I've ever tasted. He has like kind of a little side business doing it. He doesn't really do it commercially. He's got like I don't know what he does for a living. He's got some other
That's
kind of
cool.
job, but he has like he built like a wood fired oven in his backyard so he could do wood fired bread, and it's so good.
That is so cool. And this is one of the things I love about like community journalism, when somebody is inspired to do something like this. And at the end of the day, yeah, you're right. They've got food, bread, shelter, food, not bread, food, including rice, shelter, warmth, all their needs are taken care of, but something small can make somebody feel comfortable. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I actually talked to the mayor about it a little bit too. She's pretty cool, and I said maybe when the Afghan refugees come here, we can do something because I was like, man, there's a lot of them. We can't make bread for everybody. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
there's a
like,
lot.
well, and I was thinking like, well, if she was still going to be there, we'd make some for her family, but she's leaving, so she gave us a friend's family, and I'm like, all right, well, that's a place to start. We'll get them some bread. At least someone has
Yes.
bread.
I
Yeah,
know they're
maybe
super excited, by the way. I told her that it's coming.
we're working on it. Fort McCoy is the last obstacle. So, but yeah, maybe word will go around. Hey, these Wisconsin folks are pretty cool. They brought us some bread. If you go to Wausau, maybe they'll bring you some bread too.
Yeah. And when I did reach out to Khwaga, because he had asked me for like, oh, like, is there anything more you can tell me about why did you choose Wisconsin over Texas? You know, she had her friend who, of course, she wasn't able to see because
Yeah.
until they're released, they can't leave the vicinity. But she just said, you know, I definitely made the right decision. I know it was the right place for me, and that this was more appropriate than Texas. So it looks like Wisconsin's getting some positive reviews. So that's fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad she's not sticking around here. I'd actually like to meet her. Be interesting to talk to her.
Yeah, well, it sounds like she has some friends in the community, so we'll be back again. So I'll definitely connect everybody.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you take away most from the story? Like when you wrote from before you reported it to afterwards, like what was like the thing that blew you away the most or had the most impact on you, or any way you want to kind of take that question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think about I don't know. I think how much effort it is, like I used to travel the world. Now it's like a whole nother thing just to make it to my family's house in Wisconsin. It's like an hour train ride, a 3-hour plane ride, then rent a car in 2-3 more hours. And like, you know, sometimes the kids are like grumpy about that, but I'm like, just for her to have gone through, you know, I'm just gonna whip through it as quickly as I can here. Like 6 hours to travel 30 miles in her own country. That was preceded by just 4 days of sitting and waiting in a, you know, hotel room, then going to Qatar overnight, then going to Germany, which sounds like really awful. She described, you know, how much of a detriment it was for the women and children to be separated from the men. So she described in the piece, like being next to the woman with 10 children, and it was just too much for her to go to the bathroom with them, and they didn't even know, they weren't familiar even with what to do, and it wasn't clean, and it didn't feel like she wanted to be going back and forth, so they started using the beds. And then finally she gets to Washington, D.C., like, 10 days after she left, and then has to put her documents in this yellow envelope that says deportation papers. And she's thinking, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong. I'm going to have to go back. I have no idea. So just thinking about that, I think about how we can easily get attached to things or attached to our patterns, and just she had to give everything up and move quickly without any assurances of anything really. But yet I can tell she's going to be okay. Her voice is strong and resilient, and she's going to pull through.
Yeah, she's one tough cookie, man.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, I get nervous when I write a critical piece sometimes, and you get a little nervous about the backlash you might get. I'm like, well, she's literally reporting under threat of death. And I the closest I came was, and I probably tell this story too much, but I went to interview someone whose house / business, it was kind of like a mixture. It was like this Western store out in the middle of Amherst.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think the police raided them one night, and I was a daily reporter at the time. I was like on the crime beat, so they're like, "Hey, a bunch of police was raiding the Western B store. Go out there and see what you can find out." And of course, those state cops never talk to you, so it was more like this is what I saw. This is, as my editor at the time said, if no one's talking to you, then you become the source. And so that's what I did. And then my editor sent me back out the next morning. So I walk into this Western store, and the 2 TV reporters are already talking to the guy. And he sees me with my notebook and the camera. He's like, "Well, I can guess what you're here for." I go, "Well, you probably guessed right. So like, what happened?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm being accused of murder." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he says, "Oh, but I didn't do it." I'm like, well then. And so I interview him. It turns out it was like a cold case, and one of his former employees had kind of fingered him as the trigger man. And
Oh, wow.
I actually don't think he did it. I think it was the employee, because he was involved in he was convicted of like a cold case rape, and then like of a really grisly murder in Illinois, like horror movie kind of stuff. So I was like, yeah, it's probably that guy. But
yeah.
So I get done with the interview. It tells me all the stuff, and then I'm like, okay. So I walk out to the car, and I call my editor, and I was like, "Hey, this is what happened." And the guy had been talking about like the damage to his living quarters, and my editor says, "Well, did you see it?" I'm like, "Well, no, we were in the store part. We didn't go in his private quarters." He goes, "Well, go see if he'll let you see it, so you can see it for yourself." I'm like, "Okay." So I walk back in, like, "Hey, did you mind if I actually see the damage that they did, so I can, just get a good picture of it?" Because, "Oh yeah, come on down." So him and his friend come down, and we're walking. It's like kind of in the basement D, and we get in. And there is like a dozen assault rifles in this place, all over the place. He's got like weapons all over the place. I was like, "Ooh, this is bad." And they didn't really acknowledge it, and they're just showing me the damage. I'm like, okay, I'm like kind of keeping my back to the wall. I'm like, it's gonna do me any good for
It does assault rifles far away.
But yeah, they'll shoot me either way, right? But
oh my God, that's
yeah, I'm just tons of assault rifles. So then I came out, and it was fine. I left. I was walking to the car, and I called the office, but now it's the other editor. He's a little less aggressive, and he's like, so I told him what happened. He's like, "Okay, you're never going back there ever again."
Yeah, I bet not.
Yeah, I'm sure he was seeing all the liability issues and things, and but yeah, that was my story of being surrounded by assault rifles in the middle of Amherst.
Oh my God, that's really interesting.
At least it was never pointed at me. They were just laying there. But
see, there's the silver lining. There you go.
But yeah, like that's nothing like compared to what she must go through and must have went through on a daily basis. That's just something else.
Well, and I mean, just the struggle, and then thinking of just leaving everything that you have and identify with behind. And I was trying to get some clarity on, like, is it the Taliban, or is it simply the fear of the Taliban? And she just said there's just such a level of distrust.
Yeah, I like that you pulled that out. I thought that was a really good point for her to make and for you to ask about.
The fear versus.
Right. Yeah. It's like, so, yeah, because I mean, we hear about it here, but it's like, I don't know, the Taliban is saying one thing. I think most Americans probably don't trust the Taliban either.
Right.
Interesting that they're still on Twitter though.
Yeah,
Speaking
well,
of
and then the
cancel
other thing
culture.
that surprised me, but I still, I mean, I think I expected her to be more critical of the United States than she was. I think I find myself
Mhm.
personally to be a little bit more critical of the occupation than she was. I do talk to a lot of people who say, shouldn't have been there in the first place. It sounds like she had left for a while, gone to Pakistan, and then returned. And so she was saying, well, I'm seeing people starting to make really big changes now, and I wish they could be here longer. So I thought that's her story and that's her narrative. So I included it, but that's what we find as journalists. People will have a different take than we might at
Yeah,
times.
I thought that was interesting because from what I've seen, the first bit of involvement in Afghanistan was actually a positive, but then we took it way too far. Did you watch, I was going to say, did you watch the 9/11 documentary on Netflix? But I think there were like 4 of them. But one of them, the one that was like a 4 or 5 part documentary, it really went into depth on Afghanistan and Iraq. And for what it sounded like, at first we did a lot of good in Afghanistan. And then I forgot what happened, but we just like completely botched it after that and tried to do way too much and really didn't have, it seemed like a good classic case of like the people making the decisions really didn't have any clue what was going on the ground, and they weren't being fed the right info too. And then like there was this big shift to Iraq, and I think that was that was a huge blunder. I mean,
Yeah, and
I don't.
a lot of scholars will say that the United States is really there because of the geopolitical positioning of it, as opposed to having an interest there. Like Khwaga's perspective was that, in the beginning, there's a lot of rough things happening, meaning bombs are being dropped. I mean, people are ending
Oh
up,
yeah.
we know how that ends up. And then she was starting to see some of the changes in terms of just educational access. Like she talked about her friend who had dreams of being a professional female athlete, and
Right.
it's unclear if it's the fear itself or people aren't sure, is it our fear that's holding us back, or is it our years and years of distrust, or is it the actual the Taliban, so there's all these things that people are having to grapple with and redefine. But
I mean, I guess it makes sense to be distrustful of the people who of a group that's like committing all these atrocities and is like, oh, but we're not going to do that now. We're better now.
right.
I'm like, yeah, maybe we'll see.
Well, and
Probably not. I wouldn't put my trust in it, so I can't blame them on that.
for sure. And the thing that still I thought was powerful is that she said, yeah, but people have learned about their rights and people are fighting back and they're going to continue to use their voices. So I think 25 years ago, I don't know that we would have seen, people using their voices. So I do have hope that those who are left behind, they'll find their voice and move forward in some way. I think we have to have hope. And without it, I don't know what we do.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about that stuff, like sometimes it makes me feel like pretty lucky to be in America. I mean, we every place has problems, and you can always make things better. But when you think about people who are just like fighting for basic rights like that, it really kind of puts things in perspective.
Yeah. And I think I personally feel really lucky I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. I'm a single parent of 2, but before having children, I traveled the world a lot and ended up spending some time with some of my expat friends who are actually from places like Calcutta. I had a couple of friends from Karachi who are also Pakistan, who were also expat workers in Doha, Qatar. And so I ended up there a few times and then ended up going into like the women's college and getting to get a sense of the country. And I just think if people have a chance, like maybe people can't travel to Qatar or go to another country where like maybe even traveling is not a possibility, but I hope that if people can even tap into like a community opportunity where you can get to know people from other backgrounds, like, I mean, if you read the story this time, you'll know that maybe there's a little bit of pun intended, but if you can break bread with somebody of a different life experience, you'll find a commonality, and it can be a different culture, maybe you think that you wouldn't get along because you have different political beliefs or whatnot, but I think the world becomes so rich once we start to just connect to people on that basic level.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. Yeah, one of my favorite things was to I always seem to have, even after I graduated, I always seem to have a connection with the international kids at the university, and that was super interesting for a few different reasons. It was really cool to experience other people's cultures. You also kind of had to temper that expectation with the realization that most kids who are coming to America to study probably have a lot, probably they probably come from pretty wealthy backgrounds. So you're sort of getting a biased viewpoint in that sense. So there's benefit to travel too, and seeing some of these people in their own countries. You meet people who are from all walks of life.
For sure.
But yeah, like what I really liked about the international kids at the university was that all their parties were centered around food. So it wasn't like let's go buy a keg or whatever. It was more like let's all get together and make dishes from our country, and that was always really super fun.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Food is, no matter what we do, we're always going to eat. And then as I was, kind of talking with different people on campus, like in the Center for Women and Gender Equity, one of my Afghan colleagues who happens to be married, she's Muslim and is married to a Jewish man, so she doesn't publish, like she doesn't talk about that, but I'm not giving away her name, so we're safe here. And she was talking to my Afghan student who's a cousin of Khwaga, and she was saying, there's many Afghan families, and in many cases, like the women are still in the kitchen and the men are sitting around in the living room. And I said, oh, well, my Polish Catholic family is exactly like that.
Right.
And so I think the more that we can, as people, as human beings, like really start to look at our own, look at the ironies and what we're observing and think, okay, well, maybe that's not a them issue, maybe that's an us issue, and maybe we all have our own stake in it. I think the more that we can do that and look at like what is it that unites us, or what are our common struggles, our common experiences, first of all, we're going to find that they exist, because I think sometimes we think they don't, because things look so far away if all you've ever seen is a television story.
Right.
But
yeah, when you actually go to a place, like that was the first time I left the country, that was sort of a realization. It's like, yep, the laws of physics still work here. Like it's not, you kind of get that feeling if you haven't left, you haven't gone to a foreign country, like you almost have that feeling like it's an alien world. And then you get there and you're like, okay, cool. I mean, I was in places in the mountains in Japan where I'm like, I could have been dropped here and I would think it was Wisconsin. I wouldn't know the difference until.
wait, where did you go? Was that your first place that you left?
First place.
Where in Japan?
I was all over. I went on my first trip to Japan I was teaching English, kind of like English immersion camps. So they'd be kind of held in, we traveled all over. Our home base was Tokyo, but like they didn't really tell us where we were going most of the time. That wasn't really, it was kind of more of I know the Japanese had an expectation. It was like, well, we just go where we go, and we're the authority, so we say where you're going, and you go there. We don't have to tell you, and it was fine. It's like that's our job. So we just went to these camps. But yeah, there was one. The first camp we had was in kind of this mountain. Well, for Wausau folks, it was probably about the size of Rib Mountain, maybe a little bit bigger, but surrounded by this small town of about 250,000. That just kind of like ringed the mountain. It was really interesting.
Well, so this is a fun commonality. So I started traveling the world because when I was 17, I got a Kikkoman soy sauce scholarship that sent me to Kawaguchi, Saitama. And so then I returned to Japan for college after I became fluent in the language. And then I lived in Akita, and then I went back and worked as a journalist. I turned down at an offer of working for a Japanese car company as an interpreter, or doing a one-time $4,000 journalism job. So I chose that, of course.
Nihongo dekimasu ka?
Dekimasu yo, wakarimasu yo.
Oh, sugoi
Brian
ne.
Sunmo. Wakarimasu ka?
Tashi mo demo jozu janai kedo.
This is great. How fun is that?
Yeah.
Fellow Wisconsinite.
So yeah, I was gonna say this is like, and I think this is relevant for people who are going to be, adapting to these refugees. Like if you haven't been in, well, two things from my Japanese experience. Like, I think if you've never been a minority at some point in your life, it's a good experience to experience that. It's eye-opening.
For sure.
When you're on a train, you're the only white dude, and you're like, oh, this is it's like it's like gets you a little, it's not the same, but it like gets you a little bit closer to realizing what it might be like to be a minority, because everyone's kind of looking at you a little bit, like not necessarily being mean, but it's like you get noticed, like you're not going to blend in, and it's like, oh, okay, that's what that's like. All right. And then
Yeah.
the other was I had a Japanese girlfriend for a little while, and I went to stay with her at her grandparents' house. And her grandparents did not speak English other than like 2 or 3 words, which is, of course, why would they? And she had decided a few weeks before I got there that she was not going to speak any English to me either. So I needed to like, use the Japanese that I'd been learning. And it was time for, me to learn what that was like. And I gotta say, that was one of the hardest experiences of my life. It's really frustrating when you know that you're communicating at a level that's far, far below what you're capable of,
Yeah.
and not being able to find the words to express yourself. And knowing that if it was in English, you'd be able to do this easily, but not being able to do it and not having any training wheels, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great example, and I wish more people had that experience. There's the quote, like, to have a second language is to have a second soul. So when I went the first time as a 17-year-old, and people are admiring and they're touching your blonde hair or whatever, that could seem like weirdly flattering for somebody who's not familiar. But then I thought, no, I have no idea about anything like this. So I need to actually go learn the culture and figure out how to apply for and get another scholarship. And so then I went to college, but at like I was at like a 6th grade level, but in college. So I'm like, and then 6th graders can speak, if you speak to a 6th grader who speaks English, they speak pretty well. But to do the reading every night and to do everything else, like I ended up going to classes with other people who had spouses who'd married into Japan, but maybe they couldn't communicate very well with their own spouse. And yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. In order to like really understand like the difficulty of having to communicate in a language that's not your own, you really have to go through that whole kind of experience. And I don't know that a lot of people have that. So if you don't have that, and you can just put yourself in that place of imagining it and thinking about what would that be like for you, I think that can help us be a little bit more compassionate.
Yeah, I mean, once you've had to do it, then you realize, okay, this is like, I'm just blown away. Like, I think we take it for granted when folks come here and they can speak English. It's like, I give them a lot of credit. Like, it's like, man, it's hard. My Japanese never got very good. I mean, that single, it was like, I think we made it like 4 or 5 days before she gave up and would speak a little bit of English to me to help me out. But my Japanese got so much better in that 5 days because I was forced to use it. I had to find, no matter how badly I said something, I had to say it to get what I needed or do what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so, but it's painful, man. So I have a very deep appreciation for that, when people like, especially these guys, I mean, they're coming over here like they didn't have any time to prep. It's like, get on a plane or, maybe get killed by the Taliban. So
yeah, and Khwaga, I think, started out as an interpreter for some of the media, and then her English was so solid and she'd already had connections. So then I think she started to do some of the reporting. But I guess there's one other thing that I was thinking about as I think this was before I had done this story. I went out to dinner with my friend who's a faculty member here. Her name is Amira, and she's Egyptian. She wears a hijab. We went to this restaurant, and there was this old dude who'd had several drinks, and he was offering to buy us drinks, and obviously she's not going to drink, and so I also didn't drink, and so I'm like, sure, you can buy me a sparkling water. And then this man was like, oh, what does your husband do? And she said, oh, he's an engineer. And he went on to tell her how lucky she was to have such a good husband and to be living in this great country. And I'm like, Amira, why aren't you telling him that you're a professor? You have a PhD, that you're the one who brought your family here. She's like, I get tired of like having like So sometimes, especially Muslim women, are feeling a little bit unseen here and just unacknowledged. And that particular friend, she told me, like, when she goes to have a conference with her preschool child's teacher, the preschool teacher will say, like, "Where are you from?" And she's like,
Oh, geez.
"Please speak English." But just kind of the assumptions that sometimes people would have, that maybe she's met with the assumption that maybe she doesn't speak the language. She must be at home. She must, if she's out, somebody must have dropped her off. She must not drive. So I hope people can also think beyond these things, or if we might catch ourselves asking about somebody's spouse, which we know that happens. I found even in my own travel experience, when I went to Japan, people would say, "What does your dad do?" And I'm like, "He's a janitor. He doesn't," and I don't even know where he is right now. So I think it's a global thing that we do, where we kind of make assumptions sometimes.
I guess so, yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the refugee experience happens here and how it compares to the Hmong experience. I assume it would be much smoother than that. It's good. I mean, it was good to hear the webinar, because it sounds like all the different, agencies, like the school districts and the literacy program and all that stuff, they're all gearing up to help these people. So I have a lot of hope that it's going to go well.
I have a lot of hope too. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I thank you so much for letting me come and hang out with you today on your podcast.
Yeah, it was a good time. Anything else you wanted to talk about before I let you go?
We covered a ton of things. I was just going to say, if you're interested in learning a little bit, getting the world in bite-sized pieces and learning a little bit about people's stories. I know you're a writer too, Brian, but I happen to have, I have this really cute little book. It's tiny. It's for a coffee table. It's called The Journey of Life, 100 Lessons from Around the World. And it's at that really cool bookstore in downtown Stevens Point.
Is that Kindred Spirits?
Yes. And
Cool.
I think it's really important for us to think about and amplify independent news, independent bookstores. So just wanted to do a quick shout out to them as well, in case.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, you might want to try to get that into Yankee bookstore as well. Independent bookstore, been around for 100 years here in Wausau.
I'm gonna look into them. That's awesome.
I know my friend Chris has been selling his books there, as well as Amazon, and he's been trying to he always pushes people to go there first. He's like, I'd rather he actually makes a little less money, but he's like, I'd rather you go there and put more money into Jeff Bezos' pocket. Oh, I guess it's not his anymore.
Oh my God, I hear myself saying that all the time. Yeah, literally I said it today when figuring out where to order books for students. But yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much for being on. Do you want people, is there a place people could follow you if they want? And also maybe for Khwaga, I keep saying her name wrong.
Khwaga, no, that's okay. Khwaga Ghani. I have a podcast, which is SharonSobotta.podbean.com, and I'm on social media, Sharon K. Sobotta. Pretty easy to find. Mm-hmm. So I hope to stay in touch, and I hope to be back with you sometime on your podcast, and can't wait to visit Wisconsin in a few months from now.
Right on. Look me up when you do. And I think Khwaga's on Twitter too, right?
I think she is. I will find all the.
I think I found her yesterday.
Okay, awesome.
Poked around a little bit. So yep. So I was in my podcast by saying keep it Wausome. So keep it Wausome, Sharon.
Keep it Wausome. Thank you so much.
And you guys keep it Wausome too, and we will see you in the future.
37-year-old Khwaga Ghani is one of the 20,000 Afghan refugees staying at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, along with her sister and her parents. Ghani reported for NPR and a number of American news outlets, while also working with Amnesty International. And as the main breadwinner from her family, she says she had to flee the country when the Taliban took over.
I used to go to places where I had to report from, and it didn't matter if it was dangerous or not. I had to go for my report and the stories that I was doing. So yeah, my mom was always worried. My dad, he was always worried about my security, and he thought that I will be a target. So when the Taliban came in, I had to flee. I had to leave the country.
Ghani says her journey from Kabul to Wisconsin has been anything but direct.
We came out on 19th of August and we went to Serena Hotel, stayed there for 4 days, and after 4 days we got an escort taking us to the airport, and we came out around 7 p.m. and we got to the airport around midnight.
And hold on, I just want to pause and interject here for our listeners, because we talked about this and you told me it was a 30-mile span and it took you about 6 hours, right, for the 30 miles?
Yes, it was because a lot of people were trying to go to the gates and they wanted to go through the checkpoints. Some people were walking, some people were going in the van, some people were going in their own cars. So there were so many people on one road, and there were Taliban checkpoints as well. They were shooting to scare off people so they won't go in and they won't rush into the gates, and a lot of mess. It was a nightmare. We got to the part where the American soldiers were, and then we went through their checks, their search. They searched our bags, they searched us. In the beginning, they told us that this gate was only for those who were green card holders and American passport holders, or the people who had American visa on their passport. Because we had an escort with us, and they already had spoken to the American soldiers, and they knew that who we were, and again, they knew that we were working for the American radios, and a lot of people with us were working with the embassy. We got on the buses and we went inside the airport where everything was destroyed. The airport was not like the airport that we had seen before. Everything was broken, everything was ruined, there was garbage everywhere.
Do you think that all happened in the days where the transition of power took place, or how did the airport become destroyed?
The first day when the Taliban came to Kabul, this is what happened. A lot of people rushed into the airport and people were trying to get on a plane and get out. It did not matter who the person was, just everyone was rushing towards the airport. And a lot of people died because they were sitting on the wing of the plane.
There must have just been such a level of desperation, it sounds like.
Yeah, like people were so desperate, they didn't know how to run away from the fear of the Taliban. They would move us for a little bit, and then we would stay for like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then move for 10 minutes, and then stay behind for another few hours. And we stayed the night there. My mom and dad, they were both so cold. It was so cold at the airport. We didn't know because we didn't have anything warm with us. No jackets, no sweaters, no blankets, nothing with us. And we had to stay the night there at the airport on the ground. I found white sheets there, and then I brought 2 of them, and I had to cover my parents and my sister. And then we spent the night like that, and in the morning we went through our biometric, and then they took us to the gate where we had to get on a bus and then get on a military plane. And we went through biometric and then stayed at a gate for a few hours, and then they took us near the airplane and we got on a U.S. military airplane.
How many times did you have to go through that biometric process during your journey?
Twice in Kabul, went through biometric. From Kabul, when we got to Qatar, there was another biometric. And from Qatar, when we got to Germany, there another biometric. From Germany, when we got to Washington, D.C., another biometric. And now, when we are in Wisconsin, we did another biometric.
From there, Ghani and her family traveled to Doha, Qatar, where they spent a day and a night, and then to Germany, where she says they spent 4 long days in poor conditions.
When I got to the airplane, I asked the soldier, I was like, where are you guys taking us? And then he said, you're going to Germany. Okay, we're going to Germany. We couldn't take a shower, and there were so many people from villages, from the mountains who had come, who had never seen a life in a city and how to use bathrooms. They did not understand anything. So the bathrooms were dirty. The place where they had these toilets, they smelled so bad. You couldn't pass by that place.
the pandemic is a real thing even there, so there's no room to take any COVID precautions, you said.
No, nothing. There was nothing. Everybody was sleeping right next to each other. Right next to each other, we were all sleeping. And people found lights in their heads. And a woman had 10 children with her. And her husband was not with her. She was taking care of them all alone. And she didn't know what to do. So if her child wanted to go to the bathroom, she would just tell them, sit here with the bed and pee.
Oh, wow.
Pee here. I can't take you with every second to the toilet. So we would smell all that pee and all the other bad smells were all together. It was so dirty. So at the end, because I got really dirty and I had to take a shower, and I told my dad, I was like, Dad, I cannot stay like this anymore. I have to take a shower. My dad took me to the men's side where there were showers. So me and my sister both, we went there and took a shower there. That was like the last day that we stayed there. And then the next day, they gathered us and told us that we have to leave. So in 4 days, we left Germany, the Ramstein base.
Then they went to Washington, D.C., where Ghani says she was afraid of another obstacle.
When we got to D.C., we waited for around 5 hours at the airport. They took our documents from us and put it in a yellow envelope which said deportation papers.
And tell us what that was like.
So when they gave me that envelope, my heart dropped, and I thought there's something wrong with my documents. I don't know what's wrong, but there's something wrong. That's why they gave me this envelope. And the second day, they called out my name, and I went and I asked what's going on. They said, gather yourself and tell your family to come, all of you get together and come here and sit here. We went and took our stuff with us, and we sat there for a few minutes, and a military guy came with all our passports and a stamp of humanitarian peril on our passport. And then I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, a
there was
sigh of
nothing
relief.
wrong with my documents. We stayed a night in the expo center where they gave us food. We had dinner, and then there were showers, proper toilets. We went to toilets, and we went to shower and got cleaned up and everything. And we came back and ate. We had dinner, and then we slept for a few hours and woke up early in the morning. And because we kept hearing the announcements that they were making, whomever wants to go to Texas, they can go to Gate 4 and gather there. They're going to be taken to Texas. Whomever wants to go to Wisconsin, they will, at this time, the airplane is going to take them to Wisconsin. So go to this gate. We kept hearing this announcement the whole night. And then early morning, my father woke us up and said that, let's move. Let's go.
Okay.
And then, from there, they told me that I have to wait in the expo center for a few hours. And then after a few hours, they're going to direct us to a gate to whichever base, to Texas, or we want to go to Wisconsin. So these were the two options that we had. So my father was like, where do we go? And I was like, Wisconsin. So he's like, why not Texas? I was like, from what I know, Texas is not the appropriate place for us to go. Wisconsin, I have a friend there, and her family is there, and she can help us with stuff. And then he said, okay, that's fine then. Let's go to Wisconsin. So
that's how you made your decision, really on the fly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we went to the gates and waited there for a few hours, and then they took us to the bus, and the bus street took us to the plane. We got on a plane. That plane gave me coffee after a week and a half.
How was it to have your first cup of coffee after a week and a half?
It was so relieving. Oh my God. My mom and dad and my sister and me, because we are so addicted to coffee, we would have one coffee in the morning and one when we would come back from work in the evening, like around 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
My mom and dad would be sitting in the yard on the grass. They had this little table and this chairs. They would be waiting for us so we can come in and have coffee together. And we did not have one coffee in a week and a half.
Because you
So
were
we were
moving
all
from place
craving.
to place to place, right?
Yeah. And then the plane gave us a very nice coffee, and we all had the coffee, and we said, "Oh my God!"
So hopefully they didn't give you
Thank God.
Folgers.
Yeah, real coffee.
Oh my
real
gosh.
coffee. They gave us real coffee. It was really good.
Finally, more than a week after leaving home, the family made it to Fort McCoy in Wisconsin. Ghani says that while she's relieved to be in a safe, warm place where she feels well cared for, she misses simple things like bread and tea, and is craving for transparency and clarity.
More than 20,000 people are living here. And yeah, I am living with 1, 2, 3 other families.
Okay.
We are the 4th family living on top in a barrack. In the bottom, there are 4 other families living.
You all leave and go someplace central to get your meals during the day, and then you come back to your bunker. Is that how it works?
Sometimes we go eat in the DFAC. We have like food cards every week. So my father goes there and takes all these 4 cards and brings the food into the place, and we sit and eat together.
Tell us about the food. Give us a sample of the menu.
The food here is okay. It's not enough for us. The amount is very less. And sometimes they mix the food, like they mix rice and eggs. In the morning, in breakfast, there is rice with cooked eggs, and it's all mixed up that you cannot have. And they don't give us bread, which is very, very important.
You said usually at home you'd have bread and tea all the time, right? And those staples are not available.
Yeah. Tea, sugar, and bread. If we did not have anything else at home, we always had these 3 things at home to eat. So we are used to bread. Afghans are used to bread. Even if we have pasta cooked at home, we will have bread with that. We can understand there are so many people to take care of. People are here with a lot of children.
Yeah.
Who do not understand what rules are, because they have been living in villages, they have been living in mountains. They have to take care of that. They have to take care of food. A lot of people are sick here. A lot of people have health issues like diabetes. A lot of people are on insulin here. And plus, it's getting cold nowadays, and they're taking care of bringing warm clothes for these people. And on top of that, they are taking care of all the paperwork at the same time.
The treacherous travel conditions, I can imagine people could get even the simple flu from that, let alone those conditions under a pandemic.
I haven't heard of the COVID, but yeah, measles were spread, and that's why we got the measles shot, because they want to stop the spread.
And then they made you take a couple of other vaccinations, right?
Yeah. We had three vaccinations. I don't know what were the other 2 for, but one was for measles. I know that. The COVID testing is like we had like 7 or 8 COVID tests since the day we've been on the run.
One of the things that you shared that's been really hard is that you really haven't known your next step, right? Like you go to the airport, you know you're leaving, and you don't know where you're going, and you end up in one country after the next, and now you're kind of in a holding pattern again, and you don't know how long you're going to be there.
Yes.
What's that like?
Yes. That's one of the biggest problems that we've been having, that nobody tells us what's going on. Nobody's telling us how long we're going to stay here. Nobody's telling us how long is this process going to take. As I told you that I did not know when we were leaving for Germany. Nobody told us anything, just told us to line up. So we're going to the airplane. We got to the airplane, and then I asked, and then they told me that we're going to Germany. Or else, nobody was telling us anything. Just get on a plane. Get on this plane, get on a bus, line up, we're leaving. Where are we leaving? Why are we leaving?
That's gotta be so anxiety provoking, right?
It is. Like, seriously, until I got to Wisconsin, I was not sure if I'm going to get to the U.S. or they're going to take me somewhere else. I swear I did not know.
You bounced through 4 countries, right? In multiple days. And now you also don't know when you're leaving Wisconsin.
Yeah, I don't know.
So you've landed a journalism human rights fellowship in Berkeley, you said, but you're not even sure when you might get here. And you've heard conflicting reports. What are the reports about when you might be able to leave and come to California, where you have some family and you have this fellowship opportunity?
Oh, well, now they are trying to find some answers for us, because it's not just me. As I told you, that more than 20,000 people are here, and they all have the same question. When are we leaving? When is the process ending? What is our last step here, you know? They told us when we were getting vaccinated that we're going to be here for 21 more days, so they can see how the side effects are, how it's going to affect our body. And after that, there's going to be a proper medical checkup.
I almost feel like the finish line keeps moving.
Exactly. So when they took us for a vaccine, we thought this is the medical. But no, it was not the medical. It was just the shot.
Nice. After what you went through. The last thing that I wanted to mention before we move on from this is that even though you have a friend in Wisconsin, you can't see your friend because you can't leave the base at all, right?
Yes. I can't leave the base. Nobody can come visit us here at the base.
And how does that feel for you?
Oh, well, it feels like I am in a prison. This is how I feel.
Yeah.
And really, there's nothing really, there's nothing to do. I mean, I am a workaholic person, and I've been busy my whole life. I've never been sitting idle and doing nothing. But I keep myself busy. I still speak to a lot of my friends and the help they need. I help them with translation and a lot of things that they need from me. But then again, right now, I do nothing but sleep.
In the same way that Afghan refugees aren't getting the clear answers they are hoping for in fleeing the country, Ghani says the people of Afghanistan were not at all prepared for the United States' departure.
If we would have known that, yes, the United States is leaving after 20 years, everyone would have prepared themselves, the army would have prepared, everybody would have put all their efforts and all their energy to be prepared. If they're going to leave in 20 years, we have to be prepared to take care of everything on our own. Oh, we're going to leave on this, and they didn't leave. Oh, we're going to leave, but they didn't leave. And we're going to leave, nothing happened. And boom, Biden came, they left. People were thinking that, oh, they're just saying that we're leaving, but they will not leave.
Right. So it feels like you haven't received transparency necessarily from the United States on any front, right?
Exactly. It's the same thing which is happening right now with us, that, you know, you're going to be out in 21 days. You're going to be out in 2 weeks. You're going to be out in 3 weeks. And now they told us 2 to 3 weeks in the beginning when we were coming to Wisconsin, that you're going to stay at the base for 2, maximum 3 weeks. And now after 2 weeks, they're saying that you're going to stay here for 21 more days.
And so you don't know who to believe.
I don't know who to believe. I seriously don't know who to believe.
While many people feel that the United States should have never been in Afghanistan to begin with, Ghani says she wishes they would have stayed longer.
This is my own personal opinion. I wanted them to stay for another 20 years. Because right now, in these 20 years, people like me and people of my generation understood what education is and what their rights are. What are the women's rights? What are human rights? What are children's rights? We had created a very nice lifestyle for ourselves. And the people in the cities had learned about rules, regulations, rights, education, rights to education, everything. This was our generation. And 20 more years, there would have been a new generation, and we would have given them all these perspectives, all these ideas. We would transfer that to the next generation. And then from there, it would go to the next, to the next, and to the next. But them pulling out now made us go back into the 90s.
And one of the stories that you told me earlier was about somebody that you encountered. You said that you watched some elderly, uneducated people bringing their daughters to school. Can you tell us that story and what it meant for you?
Yeah, so there was an old man who was taking his 16 or 17-year-old daughter to school. And he was going with her because he didn't want anybody to say anything to her. He was trying to keep her secure when she was going to school. I assume people would stop him and ask him, why are you taking your daughter? She's a teenager. She should not be going to school or something, you know? So that's because he wanted people to understand that he's the one who's taking his daughter to school. So he was taking his daughter to school. And I asked him, I said, how come you're taking your 16-year-old daughter to school now? You should have taken her when she was a child. He said, we did not understand what education was. But now that we know what the value of education is, I want my daughter to learn. I want my daughter to go along with the society. So this is why I am taking her to school so she can learn something, and then she can teach me something. Because I do the same thing. I told you that, you know, my father and my mother, they are educated, but they didn't understand what the new technology was. And I knew, because I was a new generation, and I understood everything, and I had studied, and I had the education to tell them what a smartphone is, and what a laptop is, and how you can use them, and how positive it is for your knowledge.
You know, of course, it's a mixed bag when, you know, another country is present in yours for such a long time. But you said that one of the things that you were picking up on is that people were changing their perspectives.
From the day I came back to Kabul, it was 2011 when I came back from Pakistan, people did not value education as much. But slowly, it was 2016 when people started valuing education and their kids going to school, and that was only in the cities. This is what I said. It was all only going in the cities, like big cities like Kabul, Mazar, Herat, and girls were participating in sports. There were, oh my God, there were football teams of girls, there were cricket teams of girls, there were volleyball teams of girls. I had a volleyball player, my friend, who I left in Kabul, and my heart really bleeds for her right now. And she was trying to flee, like 2 months before anything happened. She was like, Khwaga, I'm so scared. I know the Taliban are gonna come and I won't be able to play anymore. And she was in national team. And she said, I'm so scared. Can you find a way for me so I can get out and I can continue my sports and I can continue to play and become a role model for other Afghan women who can come forward and start playing like I do.
So she didn't get out.
I tried everything. I couldn't help her.
So she's still there.
And she's still there.
Okay.
She's at home. She's not playing. She's not going to school. She's just staying home.
Her life is on hold.
Yes.
Okay. And how old is this friend?
She's 19.
Oh, that's a sad story.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that boys and girls were both going to school, and now some of the boys that you knew were still going to school. Some of the girls weren't doing that anymore, or they even left university. You gave me a story about that. Do you think it's the fear itself that's holding them back, or do you think that we've heard a lot of terrible things about Taliban?
The history that we have with Taliban.
So people don't trust them at all.
The fear that we have. People don't trust them. Like I told you, I personally do not believe on whatever they're saying. I will never believe it.
Earlier, I was asking you because the Taliban is saying that they're going to be kinder now and more humanitarian, and you started laughing. Tell me why.
Yes, I laughed because I never trusted. When they were sitting in Doha and saying that there will be women's rights, there will be girls going to school, there will be women going to work. I said, no, it's not going to happen. And it's not happening. You probably are hearing about what's going on right now. Women cannot go to work. Girls are not going to school. Girls are not going to universities. Even if they're going to universities, there is segregation. They have curtains between the boys and the girls. The social media tells you everything.
Does everybody still have access to social media?
Yeah. There are a lot of women right now fighting for their rights. They don't care if they're going to be killed, they're going to be beaten up, but they still are working.
That's what I was wondering about, because I can feel this sense of resiliency and strength in your voice. So I wonder, how do you suppose that the women who are left behind will fight back?
Well, the women have understood a little bit about their rights and their values in the society. So those women who have understood will not stay calm, they will not shut up, they will raise their voices, and they will keep raising their voices even if they get killed.
As thousands of refugees will at some point be leaving military bases and joining communities around the country, I asked Ghani what Americans can do to be supportive.
Just give them a chance to understand the rules and regulations. Just have some patience for them. They will understand everything gradually.
And the other thing that you said to me that I thought was really illuminating is that you said just be forthcoming, right? Be transparent with information.
Yes, also that. Please be transparent as much as you can so we understand what the real situation is and what really is going on so we can understand things better and we can prepare ourselves for whatever is coming.
If you think about your life journey that has led you to being like a reporter, like a translator, a reporter, to now having to flee a country and now living you described it as nice compared to other places that you've been on the journey fleeing from Afghanistan, but also prison-like. What's the most important lesson you have learned on this journey?
I have learned that I have to be strong and have to face everything what comes in front of you. You have to stand strong.
That's Khwaga Ghani speaking from Fort McCoy about her journey from Afghanistan to Wisconsin. Ghani says that when she leaves Fort McCoy, her next stop will be in Berkeley, where she will pursue a 6-month journalism and human rights fellowship.